Welcome to another episode of the video. The darkest secrets of history's most notorious serial killers. For more video like this, subscribe, like, and share our channel. Life Fact Daily. Today we open the door into a world most of us fear, but can't stop watching. The terrifying world of serial killers. These are not just names on paper or villains from movies. They are real people, neighbors, workers, doctors, fathers, who walked among us, and whose secrets shock the world. This series will uncover the darkest secrets of history's most notorious serial killers. Some will disturb you, some will leave you shocked, and others might make you realize how fragile the line between ordinary life and unimaginable horror really is. So grab your headphones, dim the lights, and let's begin with the origins of infamy. Ed Gein, the killer who inspired Hollywood. When you hear the name Ed Gein, you might picture a chainsaw, a creepy farmhouse, and a man wearing a mask made of human skin. That's because Gein inspired some of the most famous horror movie villains of all time. Norman Bates from Psycho, Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and Buffalo Bill from The Silence of the Lambs. But here's the shocking fact. Ed Gein wasn't technically a serial killer. Yes, he was a murderer. Yes, he was a grave robber. Yes, his house was filled with grotesque trophies. Lampshades made of human skin, bowls carved from skulls, and masks fashioned from corpses. But by FBI definition, a serial killer must commit at least 3 murders over time. Gein was only ever convicted of killing 2 women, Mary Hogan in 1954 and Bernice Wardens in 1957. The rest of the horror? Gein dug up corpses from local cemeteries and used their body parts in his twisted projects. His crimes shook the small town of Plainfield, Wisconsin, and rippled through American culture. Think about that. A man who killed only 2 people became one of the most notorious murderers in history. It wasn't his number of victims. It was the sheer shock value of his crimes. Luis Garavito, the Beast of Colombia. From Wisconsin, we travel south to Colombia, where the nickname the Beast belonged to one of the deadliest serial killers in human history. Luis Garavito. Between 1992 and 1999, Garavito murdered at least 189 children. Some investigators believe the real number could be 300 or more. He preyed on poor and homeless children, victim society often overlooked. Garavito would lure children with gifts, money, or promises of work. Once isolated, he tied them up, tortured them for hours, and finally killed them. His cruelty was beyond comprehension. When caught, Garavito confessed in disturbing detail, leading police to the burial sites of many of his victims. His sentence was a jaw-dropping 1,853 years in prison. But Colombian law capped maximum sentences at just 40 years, and his cooperation reduced it further to 22 years. The thought that one of history's deadliest killers could walk free terrified Colombians. But fate intervened. Garavito died in 2023 while still behind bars. His story is a chilling reminder. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators hide in plain sight, protected not by cunning, but by society's blind spots. Dennis Rader, BTK's fatal mistake. Next, we travel back to the United States, where one of the most infamous killers of the 20th century got caught in the dumbest way imaginable. Dennis Rader, better known as BTK, short for bind, torture, kill, terrorized Wichita, Kansas for decades. Between 1974 and 1991, Rader murdered at least 10 people, carefully binding his victims, torturing them, and then killing them in cold blood. Rader was methodical. He studied his victims, planned his attacks, and lived a double life as a church president and home security technician. To his neighbors, he was a polite family man. To his victims, he was a sadistic monster. For years, BTK taunted police with cryptic letters, poems, and riddles. He loved the attention. He wanted the world to know he was smarter than the detectives chasing him. But arrogance would become his downfall. In 2004, after a decade of silence, BTK resurfaced. In one of his communications, he asked investigators a simple question. Can you trace a floppy disk? The police lied. They told him no. Rader, trusting his own intelligence, sent a floppy disk to the local news station. Forensic experts pulled metadata from the disk, which led straight back to a computer at his church. Within weeks, Dennis Rader was arrested. A man who called himself a master criminal was undone by a rookie tech mistake. Bela Kiss, Hungary's pickling killer. Sometimes, killers escape justice entirely. One such man was Bela Kiss, a Hungarian murderer active in the early 1900s. Kiss was charming, intelligent, and respected. But behind closed doors, he strangled women, many of whom he lured through personal ads. He stored their bodies in large metal barrels filled with alcohol, telling neighbors they contained gasoline. When World War I broke out, Kiss was conscripted into the army. During his absence, his landlord inspected the barrels and uncovered a horrifying collection of preserved corpses. By the time police began searching, Kiss had disappeared. Some claimed he was killed in battle. Others reported sightings years later across Europe. His final fate remains a mystery. What's certain is this: Bela Kiss may have killed 23 women and vanished without ever facing justice. Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. Finally, for part 1, we end with a man whose crimes still haunt California. Richard Chase, known as the Vampire of Sacramento. Chase was deeply disturbed, suffering from untreated schizophrenia. He believed his blood was turning to powder and that only consuming the blood of others could save him. In the span of 1 month in 1978, Chase killed 6 people, drinking their blood, mutilating their bodies, and even consuming organs. His victims range from a 22-month-old baby to entire families. But here's a strange detail. Chase only entered homes that were unlocked. In his delusion, he believed that an unlocked door meant he was welcome. If the door was locked, he walked away. This chilling fact echoes the legends of vampires, that they can only enter your home if you invite them in. Richard Chase was eventually caught and sentenced to death. But in 1980, he took his own life in prison, leaving behind one of the most disturbing legacies in American true crime. From Ed Gein's grave-robbing horrors, to Garavito's unimaginable crimes, to BTK's fatal arrogance, to Bela Kiss's mysterious disappearance, and Richard Chase's vampiric killings. These are only the first 5 insane facts in our deep dive into the world of serial killers. But trust me, things are about to get much darker. We uncovered some of the most infamous names in true crime. Ed Gein, Luis Garavito, BTK, Bela Kiss, and Richard Chase. Their crimes shocked entire nations and reshaped how we think of evil. But now, we take a step deeper into the darkness. This time, we're not talking about men driven by madness, obsession, or delusion. These killers didn't just murder, they hunted. These are the serial killers who treated human life like a game. Their victims were prey, their crimes were trophies, and their killings became a sport. Brace yourself, because part 2 may be the darkest yet. Robert Hansen, the human hunter of Alaska. Imagine being dropped into the frozen wilderness of Alaska, unarmed, terrified, with someone hunting you like an animal. That was the sick fantasy of Robert Hansen, a mild-mannered baker who lived a double life as one of the most sadistic killers in American history. Between 1971 and 1983, Hansen abducted women, mostly sex workers, then flew them into the remote Alaskan wilderness using his private plane. There, he released them into the woods and hunted them with a rifle. At least 17 women were murdered this way. Some victims escaped, leading investigators to his trail. When authorities finally searched Hansen's property, they found a chilling map marked with dozens of X's, each one a burial site. The fact that a man could walk into town every morning, serve coffee at his bakery, and then spend his weekends hunting human beings is almost impossible to comprehend. Pedro Lopez, the monster of the Andes. When it comes to sheer numbers, few killers compare to Pedro Lopez, a man who earned the nickname the Monster of the Andes. Lopez confessed to murdering over 300 young girls across Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador in the 1970s and early 1980s. He targeted vulnerable children, luring them with gifts before strangling them. In 1980, he led police to mass graves containing many of his victims, confirming his horrifying confessions. He was convicted of killing 110 girls in Ecuador alone, but authorities believe his real victim count made him one of the deadliest killers in history. Here's the shocking twist. Lopez served only 18 years in prison. Upon release in 1998, he was deported to Colombia, briefly rearrested, and then released again. To this day, his whereabouts remain unknown. Imagine that. A man responsible for hundreds of murders simply vanished into society. Some say he died. Others fear he may still be out there. Andrei Chikatilo, the butcher of Rostov. In Soviet Russia, during the 1970s and 1980s, a monster was at large while the government refused to admit serial killers even existed. His name was Andrei Chikatilo, but he became known as the Butcher of Rostov. Chikatilo targeted children and young women, luring them to isolated areas before stabbing them repeatedly in a frenzy. Many of his victims were mutilated beyond recognition. He later admitted that the killings were driven by a twisted sexual compulsion. He could only achieve gratification through murder. For years, Soviet authorities denied his existence. They arrested and even executed innocent men while Chikatilo continued killing. By the time he was finally caught in 1990, he had murdered at least 52 people. In court, Chikatilo became infamous for his bizarre behavior, screaming, ranting, and pulling down his pants. He was executed in 1994 with a single bullet to the back of the head, Soviet style. His case is a chilling reminder of how bureaucracy and denial can allow evil to flourish unchecked. Israel Keyes, the ghost who planned to kill forever. Most serial killers are eventually caught because they're sloppy, arrogant, or compulsive. But Israel Keyes was different. He might be the most calculating serial killer America has ever seen. Keyes didn't kill in one place. He didn't target one type of victim. Instead, he buried kill kits across the United States, buckets filled with weapons, rope, duct tape, and cash, so that whenever the urge struck him, he could fly to a random state, dig one up, and hunt. He admitted to killing at least 11 people, but investigators believe the number could be much higher. Unlike most killers, Keyes had no clear victim profile. He murdered men, women, and couples purely for the thrill. When finally caught in 2012 after the murder of Samantha Koenig in Alaska, Keyes gave investigators chilling interviews, bragging about how careful he was and how much he enjoyed outsmarting the system. But before he could reveal the full scope of his crimes, he killed himself in his jail cell, taking countless secrets to the grave. Jack Unterweger, the celebrity killer. What if I told you a convicted murderer once became a celebrated author, a TV personality, and a symbol of prison reform, only to return to killing again while the world applauded him? That's the story of Jack Unterweger, an Austrian serial killer who became a twisted celebrity. Convicted in 1974 for murdering a young woman, Unterweger began writing plays, poetry, and crime stories in prison. Intellectuals lobbied for his release, claiming he had been rehabilitated. In 1990, he was set free. Almost immediately, sex workers across Europe and even in Los Angeles began turning up dead, strangled with their own bras. Investigators eventually realized that Unterweger had been killing again, even while interviewing police about the very crimes he committed. In 1994, he was convicted of 11 murders. That same night, he hanged himself in his prison cell using a shoelace. His story exposes a chilling truth. Sometimes the most charming monsters are the most dangerous of all. From Robert Hanson's human hunting grounds in Alaska, to Pedro Lopez's unimaginable crimes in South America, to Chikatilo's Soviet-era murders, to Israel Keyes' calculated nationwide spree, and Jack Unterweger's manipulation of fame. These killers didn't just murder. They turned killing into a sport. And we're still only scratching the surface. We explored killers who hunted for sport. Men who treated murder as a twisted game of power, domination, and thrill. From Robert Hanson's hunting grounds in Alaska to Israel Keyes' nationwide kill kits, we saw how far some will go to satisfy their darkest desires. But tonight, we descend even deeper. This part of our journey uncovers the killers who didn't stop at murder. They consumed, they collected, they experimented. They blurred the line between human and monster. Welcome to Part 3, Dark Markets and Disturbing Truths. Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee cannibal. Few names strike fear like Jeffrey Dahmer. Between 1978 and 1991, Dahmer killed 17 young men and boys. But what made him infamous wasn't just the murders. It was what he did afterward. Dahmer dismembered his victims, preserved their body parts, and in some cases, cannibalized them. Police found human skulls, organs, and even cooking utensils used on human flesh inside his apartment. He also attempted grotesque experiments, injecting acid into the brains of living victims in a twisted attempt to create obedient zombies. When caught in 1991, Dahmer confessed in horrifying detail. His crimes exposed how police negligence, ignoring complaint from neighbors, and even returning a drug victim to him, allowed him to kill for so long. Dahmer's story has since inspired documentaries, films, and endless debate. Was he born a monster, or created by neglect and obsession? Albert Fish, the boogeyman who wrote letters. If Dahmer was the cannibal of modern America, Albert Fish was the boogeyman of the early 20th century. Fish was a sadist, rapist, and cannibal who preyed on children. One of his most notorious crimes was the murder of Grace Budd, a 10-year-old girl he lured from her family with promises of a party. After killing and cannibalizing her, Fish wrote a chilling letter to her mother describing, in detail, what he had done. The letter was so grotesque that even hardened detectives were disturbed. It also became the key evidence that led to his arrest. Fish claimed to have killed over 100 children, though only a handful of murders were confirmed. He boasted about enjoying pain himself, inserting needles into his own body, a masochist as well as a sadist. Executed in 1936, Albert Fish left behind one of the darkest legacies in American crime history. Armin May West, the cannibal of Rotenburg. In 2001, Germany was shocked by a case that blurred the lines between murder, consent, and obsession. Armin May West, known as the cannibal of Rotenburg, met a man online who willingly agreed to be killed and eaten. The victim, Baron Jürgen Brandes, even signed a contract consenting to the act. May West filmed the entire process, from mutilation to cannibalism. When the video surfaced, it stunned the world. Was this murder or consensual death? Courts eventually ruled it was murder, sentencing May West to life in prison. But his case sparked global debate about free will, human rights, and the disturbing possibilities of online connections. This wasn't just a crime. It was a mirror showing how twisted desires can find a home in the digital age. Tsutomu Miyazaki, the otaku killer. In Japan, the late 1980s were haunted by Tsutomu Miyazaki, a man whose crimes blurred into the grotesque. Known as the otaku killer, he murdered at least 4 young girls, mutilating their bodies and in some cases drinking their blood. Miyazaki also engaged in acts of cannibalism, storing body parts as trophies. He taunted families by sending disturbing letters and even mailed body parts of his victims to their loved ones. When police raided his home, they discovered an enormous collection of horror films and anime, which fueled a national panic about otaku culture and its supposed connection to violence. But psychologists agreed. Miyazaki wasn't driven by media, but by deep psychological illness and sadism. He was executed in 2008, but his crimes left a permanent scar on Japan. H.H. Holmes, the devil in the White City. Before Dahmer, before Fish, before Miyazaki, there was H.H. Holmes, often called America's first serial killer. Holmes built his infamous murder castle in Chicago during the 1893 World's Fair. The building was a labyrinth of hidden rooms, trapdoors, gas chambers, and chutes designed to kill unsuspecting victims and dispose of their bodies. He lured young women seeking work into his hotel, where many were never seen again. Estimates of his victim count vary wildly, from 9 confirmed deaths to over 200 suspected. Holmes also profited from his crimes, selling skeletons and organs to medical schools. He turned murder into a business, an early example of the dark market for human remains. Executed in 1896, Holmes became a legend, inspiring books, TV shows, and even rumors that he might have escaped execution. From Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment of horrors to Albert Fish's chilling letters, from Armin Yu's consensual cannibalism to Tsutomu Miyazaki's otaku-fueled nightmare, and finally H.H. Holmes' murder castle, these killers didn't just take lives. They twisted human death into experiments, rituals, and commerce. They remind us of one disturbing truth. Some killers aren't satisfied with murder alone. We've journeyed through the minds of killers who shocked the world. The grave robbers, the hunters, the cannibals, and the manipulators. We've seen how they lived, how they killed, and how they evaded justice. But every story has an ending. And in the case of many infamous serial killers, their endings were as bizarre, chilling, and unforgettable as their crimes. Ted Bundy, the charmer's final hours. Few killers embodied the word charming like Ted Bundy. Handsome, intelligent, and persuasive, Bundy used his charisma to lure in young women. But behind the smile was a monster who confessed to killing at least 30 women, though the real number may be far higher. After years of trials, escapes, and media attention, Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair in 1989. His last words were strangely calm. "I'd like you to give my love to my family and friends." Outside the prison, crowds cheered, holding signs that read, "Burn Bundy, burn." It was a carnival of justice and vengeance. Bundy's death ended one of the most infamous manhunts in U.S. history, but his story continues to fascinate books, films, and documentaries. Aileen Wuornos, the woman who spoke to the apocalypse. Unlike most serial killers, Aileen Wuornos didn't hide her identity or deny her crimes. A sex worker who murdered 7 men in Florida between 1989 and 1990, Wuornos claimed her killings were in self-defense against men who tried to assault her. Convicted and sentenced to death, Wuornos delivered one of the strangest final statements in execution history. "I'll be back like Independence Day, with Jesus. June 6th like the movie, big mothership and all. I'll be back." She was executed by lethal injection in 2002. Her story has since been immortalized in the Oscar-winning film Monster, starring Charlize Theron. Wuornos remains one of the most infamous female serial killers in history. John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown's final joke. Known as the Killer Clown, John Wayne Gacy murdered 33 young men and boys in the 1970s, burying many of them beneath his house. By day, he entertained children at parties dressed as Pogo the Clown. By night, he was one of America's most sadistic predators. In 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injection. His last words were short, defiant, and shocking. "Kiss my ass." Even in his final moments, Gacy mocked the justice system and his victims' families. His execution, botched and drawn out over 18 minutes, only added to the grotesque legend of his life. Carl Panzram, the man who hated humanity. Some killers show remorse at the end. Carl Panzram did not. Panzram spent his life as a burglar, rapist, and murderer, claiming responsibility for over 20 murders and more than 1,000 acts of sodomy. His hatred for humanity was absolute. In 1930, before his execution by hanging, Panzram snarled at the prison guards, "Hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could hang a dozen men while you're fooling around." He left behind memoirs describing his crimes and contempt for society, becoming one of the most brutally honest voices of criminal history. Peter Kürten, the Vampire of Dusseldorf. Germany's Peter Kürten, nicknamed the Vampire of Dusseldorf, confessed to killing at least 9 people in the 1920s, though his sadistic assaults suggested many more victims. He admitted to drinking the blood of some victims, claiming it gave him sexual pleasure. Before his execution by guillotine in 1931, Kürten asked one final chilling question. "Tell me, after my head has been chopped off, will I still be able to hear, at least for a moment, the sound of my own blood gushing from the stump of my neck? That would be the pleasure to end all pleasures." With those words, he faced the blade, leaving behind one of the most terrifying final statements ever recorded. From Bundy's calm farewell, to Wuornos' apocalyptic prophecy, to Gacy's crude defiance, to Panzram's venomous hatred, and Kürten's grotesque curiosity, these last words show us something chilling. Even at the end, Many serial killers clung to the darkness that defined their lives. And yet, their stories remain burned into history, not just because of the lives they destroyed, but because society cannot look away. Serial killers represent the extreme edge of human evil. They fascinate us, terrify us, and force us to confront the darkest questions about humanity itself. So as we close, the darkest secrets of history's most notorious serial killers. Remember, evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it charms, and sometimes it lives right next door. For more video like this, subscribe, like, and share our channel. Life Fact Daily.